Welcome to the story of psychology. Throughout this class, we're going to look at how psychology is developed as a social science, as well as how all the different perspectives give us a window into better understanding the mind and behavior. Psychology's roots. We start with pre-scientific psychology, specifically looking at philosophy. Many philosophers were very interested in the mind-body connection. Contemporary psychologists also have a lot of questions that we're going to be looking at as we go through this course. The big debate, nature-nurture, the three levels of analysis, comparing how we are influenced by the environment, how we're influenced by our culture, how we're influenced by the psyche. And then we have the subfields of psychology. In India, Buddha wondered how sensations and perceptions combine to influence ideas. In China, we see Confucius stress the power of ideas and the importance of an educated mind. Hebrew scriptures link the mind and emotion both to the body. Socrates and his student Plato believed that the mind was separate from the body. The mind continued to exist after death, they thought, and ideas were innate. One thing you'll want to pay attention to during the prologue is really looking at which philosophers really take in and see the mind and body either as separate or two faces of the same coin. So make sure you're paying attention to that in your notes. Then we have Aristotle. Aristotle suggested that the soul is not separable from the body and that knowledge and ideas grow from experience. Also very similar to what we're going to be talking about with John Locke. René Descartes, like Plato, believed that the soul, or the mind, and body separation, but he wondered how the immaterial mind and the physical body communicated. Francis Bacon. This is a name that you'll see coming up later on when we talk about empiricism. He's really one of the founders of modern science, specifically using the experimental method. John Locke, going back to like I said about Aristotle, believed that the mind was tabula rasa, or blank sheet, and at birth it's our experiences that write on and make us who we are. So, as you can see, when looking at pre-scientific psychology, we have to question and look at how people have viewed the relationship between the mind and the body. Some people, on the left, you see the Hebrews, Aristotle, and Augustine, believe that the mind and body are connected, where we have Socrates, Plato, and Descartes believed that the mind and body are distinct and separable. Once again, when it coming to look at how ideas are formed in pre-scientific psychology, we look at Socrates and Plato saying some ideas are inborn, they're innate, where on the other hand, we have this blank slate idea, this idea that our experience writes on us, makes us who we are, and shapes how we think and behave. Now, psychology, a science is born. We start with the first school of psychology called structuralism. Structuralism was started by Wilhelm Wundt. Now, we move on from structuralism to functionalism. Really looking at how do people use those inner sensations, that concept of consciousness, in order to function within their environment. The main person we look at within functionalism is William James. Really taking structuralism a step further. Now, one of the most famous psychologists still talked about today in many, many settings is Sigmund Freud. Not to be confused with Siegfried and Roy, the entertainers. So Freud had this idea of the unconscious mind. He said that there are parts of our mind that affected who we are and take care of a lot of the different anxieties and instincts that we have deep down inside. He and his followers emphasized the importance of an unconscious mind and the effects it had on behavior. According to Freud, there are three parts of the conscious and unconscious mind. You have the id, the ego, and the superego. The id represents your animalistic drives and impulses, sexual and aggressive behaviors and desires. which society often deems as inappropriate. Then we have the superego, which is your sense of morality, your conscience. Think that good, evil, dynamic back and forth is somehow a lot of students tend to remember it. And then we have your ego, which is the moderator between the id and the superego. How can you find a way to better understand? It's how your mind works with what is socially acceptable versus unacceptable and meeting both of those at once. For example, say you really love cookies and your best friend has the best cookie that you could ever want. Your id saying, grab it, take it, eat it, satisfy yourself. Your superego is saying, that's not right, that's stealing, you don't do that to friends, you don't do that to people. So your ego then comes in and says, how can I moderate both? And the ego, I would like to remind you, is part of your conscious mind. Your awareness of society, right? And so the way to satisfy both of those in a socially acceptable way is to then ask your friend if you can have a piece of their cookie, because that's socially acceptable, right? To be polite and ask instead of just to grab. So therefore, the id, the ego, and the superego really is a central part of what Freud tries to examine in terms of who we are, how we think, feel, and act. Freud is one of the first personality psychologists. He's also known for a term called psychoanalysis, which is this idea of how a therapist can tap into the unconscious mind. A lot of this stuff today we don't see as scientifically backed, but yet it really plays such a strong role in the history of psychology that it has shaped many concepts about personality even today, or we look back. Another thing Freud emphasized is parenthood. He says your early childhood relationships are crucial, specifically those with your parents. We're going to talk about the Electra and Oedipus complex. Identification. Now remember, in Freud's time, a lot of his stuff was new, and a lot of his theories and ideas came about through the work with his clients, and he tended to work a lot with wealthier women. And remember, you're looking at a Victorian society in which he lives, where a lot of people are repressed, right? A lot of things aren't seen as acceptable. So a lot of times he would hear his clients trying to, and help them to make sense of a lot of the feelings and things that have happened in their life. And a lot of those he then translates into a very sexual nature. Today we see his work as more social than sexual for the Neo-Freudians, meaning neo-new coming after Freud, but still going back and holding on to his concepts of conscious and unconscious mind and how it shapes who we are. So more on Freud later.